Hey everybody, it's Rowan Dredge here. Great to have your company on the 4 Leaders TV. Really exciting to bring this show to you this afternoon, and very grateful for my buddy Taki Moore letting me use his studio today, which is excellent. I am delighted to bring in our guest, Mark McCrindle. I've actually known Mark and known of Mark for well over 2 decades. Our families have crisscrossed, and we've had connections with school and various other things. And so I'm delighted to be able to bring him into the conversation and talk about his new book, Work Wellbeing, and how significant the ideas of this are, particularly in the context of the right now, in the context of the COVID pandemic, in the context of the shifting and changing world that we find ourselves in. So let's bring Mark in and begin our conversation. So Mark, excellent to have you around, mate. Thank you so much for being with us.
Great to be with you, Rowan. And yes, the connection goes back a long way, and well done on what you're doing, and delighted to be on your program.
Yeah, we appreciate it so much. And obviously, as someone who we were talking just before the show, to someone who's a speaker and is now looking for the alternate ways to be distributing the kinds of conversations we're having, this is a really good platform for us to be talking on. So thank you again. So right from the get-go, this whole idea of a book called Work Wellbeing. Why does it matter, and what was the genesis of it, the origin of it?
Well, it matters because well-being matters, and well-being matters because people matter, and communities matter, and looking out for ourselves, but importantly, looking out for others and ensuring that they are thriving and flourishing is so key. So that's why the well-being. And as for why the work part of it, well, because we spend more than a third of our waking hours at work, and for some, it's actually more than half of their waking hours. And so if we can't get well-being right at work, we're going to have problems in our broader realm. And I think that work, not only the thriving within work and relationally and socially, financially as we get paid, but even beyond that, physically and mentally matters. But also that we can assist others in that regard, and that we can make a contribution through our work, through our skills and gifts to those around us. All of that is part of what we mean when we talk about work well-being.
Yeah, I really appreciated the way that you approach this. I think one of the dangers that we can easily get caught up in with even just the phrase well-being is we can make it actually something that, and this is a little risky what I'll say, but I'll back it up. We can actually weaponize it a little bit. And the book doesn't do that. The book does the very opposite as I've read it. The book actually leans in to the idea that you launched with and said, well, people matter. So how do we actually, and I think you pick it up in the byline of the book, thriving teams. And I think this idea of thriving and flourishing and the dedication to well, healthy, long life humanity, I think is a really key part in the book. And so as you research this, because again, McCrindle, your organization, is very well known for its research-based. How did you see and what did you notice about those links between work and well-being? What emerged as part of the investigative process?
Well, part of the prompting for us has been our ongoing research of Australian workers and some disconnection that a lot of Australians have with their jobs, with their whole vocational side of life, which is, as we said, time-wise, an important part of our life. And for many, work is just a job. For many, it's just a place where they exchange a day of their life for a day of earnings. And we have a higher view of work than that. I mean, it's got to do more than that, than just pay the bills, surely, because of the significant impact of our time, our life that is spent there. And work, when it is well conceived, work when it is well done, when we're working in a place where we can see our contributions making a difference, where we can benefit others in our interactions, when we can lead and support others in our teams, then it starts to lift. It starts to take on a new level. We've all seen those bumper stickers that say, I owe, it's off to work I go. That sort of sentiment. And we want to say to Aussies, come on, we can do better than that. And we found encouragingly, Rowan, in the research that a lot of Australians do love the work that they do. They do love their job. They find it as a place where they thrive. In fact, increasingly so. For many Australians, it's the key point in their life where they meet social needs and relational connection. It's the key point where they use gifts and skills and make a contribution. It's the key point where they feel valued, where they get feedback and encouragement compared to any other factor in their life or role in their life. So it is a key part of our life. So we just want to help Australians thrive in it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you pick up right at the very start of the book that the definition of well-being is a very important part to the overall understanding of the research and the book. And again, what I appreciated was that you had, and again, off camera as we were talking about, I said it had substance. It's the idea of the approach you've taken to well-being has substance. And we'll get to this a little bit later in the conversation, but the equivalent sort of side of that is it's got responsibility as well. And I'd love just to talk more about that. But this whole idea of the definition of well-being, you unpack really early on as something so much more holistic. Tell us a little bit about that and how you got to that conclusion to go with that sense of breadth and depth on the definition.
Well, you see, well-being is not just about wellness from a physical sense. And I'm encouraged to see right across Australia how a lot of those workplace health and safety programs have been reinvigorated and renewed as well-being programs, where we had workplace health and safety officers now as well-being officers or managers. And why? Well, because it's a lot more than physical safety that matters. In fact, mental health is a far bigger challenge in Australian workforces than physical health. We found that during COVID, we've done some research, and we're in a pretty blessed place in Australia where the least of the impacts we've all felt as Australians has been physical impacts, but far greater, more than twice the proportion who've had some impairment physically because they haven't been able to get out as much or they've been sitting around more sedentary. Far more has been the mental impacts, the loneliness, the isolation as we get cut off from our typical rhythms and connections. And that is true in the workplace. We think about workplaces as being alongside others, but workplace loneliness is a real issue. And beyond that, as I said, people finding purpose in life. And you add to that toxic workplaces and relationships. You add to that bosses who take on a very managerial and autocratic approach rather than bringing thriving to their teams. And suddenly we have disconnection, stress, dislocation, mental health issues, and a lack of well-being. So the broad view of well-being is what we want to be about: social, relational, spiritual, mental, as well as, of course, physical and financial, because the job needs to pay those bills. But it's that broad view that really is going to bring about the flourishing that we all look for.
Yeah, it's absolutely. And I appreciate the way that the book unpacks the approach to that. It says that it isn't either this immediate or this sort of more shallow approach. It's so much more than that. And it's so much more than that because we as human beings are much more than that. We've got those needs or those the desire to contribute, the desire to lean in. And I appreciated what you said earlier on where you said that almost the on-ramp for a lot of who we are as people, relationally, socially, having our strengths and skills acknowledged and recognized. When you're in the adult world, that actually tends to start at work, and then it spreads out from there. I really appreciate you picking up some of the ideas from Ian Harper, a very good man from Melbourne Business School. And at the very end, you on page 21 of the book, you talk about almost an inspirational call to action. I'll actually read it. It says, work well-being exists where people are championed above profits, where the culture is aspirational and inspirational, not just transactional, where leaders are focused on creating a community of customers, clients, and teams, where there is a compelling passion for societal good rather than personal gain. Right at the end of chapter 1. So it's almost like you've swung the bat really hard at that point to give people something to live into the book. So just with that sense of inspiration that the book invites us, just unpack it as a reader reads this, as we engage with this work and research. What sort of approach do you want us to take to it with that in mind?
Well, to be proactive in our workplaces and to embrace the breadth of the difference we can make in our customers' lives, in our colleagues' lives, in our own lives through work. we have sometimes a negative view of capitalism. People think it's just about profit. It's about, getting the best out of your staff. And Henry Ford famously said, I only need the hands of my employees, but unfortunately I've got to pay for their whole bodies to turn up. That's the worst sort of view of capitalism that unfortunately a lot of people have. And yet capitalism has always been about the common good. It's always been about creating flourishing so that our communities where we're planted can benefit. When there's profit, that means that can spread to others and there can be benefits. It means we can hire people and help them and their families and their livelihoods. It means that we can, if we look after customers, they're going to want to come back. And so they're getting value, and it's about creating value. It's about sharing that value. And capitalism is the best system when well intentioned and set up to achieve it. And so what we want to say is let's not, shy away from the great systems that we have in business, but let's not narrow them down to just be about shareholder returns or profit alone. And I love what Ian Harper was saying and what others in the book, these expert interviews we had, said, that we don't have to have one or the other. You can have profit and purpose. You can focus on people.
Absolutely.
And yet still have expectations. You can focus on giving freedoms to people, give them their own space to be entrepreneurial, but also have KPIs or goals or clear role descriptions. It's both, not one or the other. And when we get that right, we start to see well-being.
And you actually pick up that in the type of workplace that we're looking for. And I particularly want to unpack the role of leaders a little bit later in the conversation. But early on in the book, you mentioned Daniel Flynn's quote around, and he says this. He says, "Mentoring is the only proven form of time travel you can access. It's the only proven form of time travel you can access." And I just love that. And so what in terms of understanding generational diversity and the cultural diversity and beginning to say, so what is the reality? What is the lie of the land? How do we need to be approaching this as people with different generational mindsets, different perspectives of work, different seemingly work ethics? What were the lessons learned and what were the salient points that came out of that?
Well, when we researched leaders, the best leaders, we found that they had a broad view in terms of what they were achieving in business. They weren't just focused on the short term, but as you said, through mentoring, through the next generation, the long term. They weren't just focused on the next program, but the next generation. They weren't just focused on the impacts they could make in their own tenure, but what lived on after they were gone, the ongoing ripple effects of what they set up in motion while they were there. And they were focused on the breadth of their community. They recognized that strength comes through diversity, that when their workplace represents their community with all its generational, gender, and cultural diversity, then they start to bless or benefit and give better outcomes to their community. In other words, for these great leaders, diversity is not a symbol, it's an asset. They recognize that through those different perspectives and opinions, you not only get a broader and more holistic and sophisticated outcome, but you can better resonate and connect with the diversity that is our community of customers and clients, and that's what's key for our future.
It's absolutely true. And I think, again, it sets out the challenge that says, don't address this as a shallow topic. Don't address this as you later on say in the book, the facade of the wellbeing program. Let's not think of it either as something shallow or something easy. And that's what I picked up in the challenge of the book as well. You make a very interesting distinction between work and workplace, particularly in the context of millennials. And there are a lot of millennials that will pick this up and have this conversation, and they are now a dominant force in the workplace right now. Just explain that a little bit, the work and workplace distinction that you make towards the end of chapter 2.
Well, there are books and guides and websites that'll help people set up workplace wellbeing. Now, notice our book is work wellbeing because, yes, workplace wellbeing matters. So we're all for the bowl of fruit and the pot plant and, the stretch breaks and giving a bit of flexibility, make sure you got fresh air and the right climate and ergonomic chairs. I mean, that matters, of course, but that's just basic stuff. I mean, that's just an expectation these days. Surely well-being has got to be more broad than that. And we found that with the next generations as we surveyed them. Many of them weren't looking for a job. They're looking for an opportunity to thrive, to make a difference. You know, the largest sector by employment full-time equivalent in Australia now is no longer retail. It was our biggest, a lot of part-timers there, but it's been overtaken by the not-for-profit sector. More than 1.3 million Australians work in NFPs, and particularly young people. Now, big question is why? Because normally you can earn more in a corporate job than in a not-for-profit world, but they're choosing those roles because they want to make a difference, not just earn money alone. They want to have an impact. And all businesses, doesn't matter whether they're for-profit or not-for-profit, ought to be envisaged and cast that sort of vision where they can help their employees see the difference that they are making. And we said in our research for this, people said, well, what do we do if we're in a place where we're not thriving, where we're not seeing that well-being? Well, to be very practical, if it's a stable job and the pay's great, but it's a toxic environment, there's no long-term future there. You've got to have your priorities right and make those tough calls to get out of that place. Maybe work in a place where you've got to make it happen a bit more, but where you're going to thrive. Because ultimately, while we need to pay the bills in life, it's that purpose, it's that impact, it's that contribution that'll most make the difference for us in our well-being in the long term.
And I appreciate the distinction, and I'm wondering if partly what we could get confused with too is if we have workplace well-being, we have those things that you described that are BAU by as you've already said. Then sometimes we think we've done the job, and there's more to it than that, and there's more that's expected from us as leaders in that role as well. You go on to unpack some pretty challenging news in terms of how this can actually look. And in chapter 3, you talk about mental health, stress, burnout, and loneliness as all of the issues that are going on in people's lives. And one of my favorite quotes is by a man called Max Dupree, and he says, the first job of a leader is to define reality. So in the context of those work challenges, what did you notice about how they're rearing their head, how they're being experienced by people? And quite frankly, Mark, how bad did your research uncover that it is?
It is pretty bad. We cite in this a national study by the Australian Bureau of Statistics, which showed in the lead up to COVID, pre-COVID, 2 in 5 Australians said that they were often or always rushed or pressed for time. That's a pretty good definition of stress. You got 2/5 of Australians saying often or always they're feeling that. That's a problem. We asked Australians in our research for this book, what's the number one cause of stress, or the zone in which the stress comes? Is it family? Is it other activities? Is it the kids? Is it responsibilities in life, financial, health strain, or is it workplace? The number one was workplace is the key cause of stress. Now, we think that work should be one of the key causes of well-being and thriving. But if we've got our work adding to the stress, being a net negative in our lives, we've got a problem. And that does land back at the feet of the leaders who gain the benefits of their leadership role in terms of their salaries, their responsibilities, their opportunities, their career development. But many leaders are not fulfilling the role to bring about well-being in the worlds of their team members. And if work is the key cause of stress in life, then that's a major problem and shows a little bit of dereliction of duty of the leaders that have allowed that to crop up.
So one of the things that I was really curious, I appreciate you saying that, because we have to face the challenge and we have to face it head on. And there's a series of challenges that are being delivered to us either globally or nationally, or even perhaps more locally or personally to people. But I wanted just to drill down a little bit more on the idea of loneliness and how that's being experienced by people at work. I know, for example, over the last decade or more, the number of single-person dwellings that have been built in capital cities has been on the rise again. And there are more people in those sorts of environments and situations. But in the context of work, actually being at work around people and still being lonely, and how that actually is a net negative on work well-being. So drill down a little bit more on that for us.
Sure. you're right. We've got rising loneliness across our society generally and rising aloneness. 1 in 4 households in Australia are single person households. And they're not all just, retirees that might have outlived a spouse. A lot of those are young people that are moving through transitions from in their life, in their relational life. And so we do have a lot of aloneness out there. And, again, for some people, work is a place they go to, but for so many more, it's the key point of connection, of social interaction, of just that human interactivity and the professional collegiality that comes from those little chats as we're making our tea or coffee or as we're heating something up in the microwave. That's important in life, and we forget just how much that fills us as people, just those little interactions. Now, this has been a little challenging during this COVID work from home time. Now, I mentioned that before COVID, we were feeling stressed largely as Australians. COVID gave us a bit of a pause on that. Suddenly, no commute time. We could work from home. We could try to get a bit of better work-life balance. We could maybe just pause those kids' activities, and suddenly it was good, a good reset. But one of the downsides of work from home, particularly over the long term, is that people aren't getting that same social interaction. Now, we're getting it through the technologies like this, Rowan. But actually, we found in the research that Zoom calls all day or teleconferencing calls are very transactional. We get straight into it. It's business, great, thanks, see you guys, click, and we're on to the next Zoom. And so it's like we're concentrating relationship into a very efficient mechanism. But think about a normal meeting. They're inefficient in the sense that we have 5 minutes to chit chat and how's life and have the cuppa and wait for John who's coming late and all of that sort of stuff, bit of chit chat at the end. And we think, well, not very efficient, but that's the stuff of life and relationships and growth, and it does fill us. And so we've lost that. As humans, we're made for that interaction and for that physicality of connection. So we need to be more mindful of that in this new era going forward, particularly as work from home will be the new normal for many. We have to double down on culture. We've got to, as leaders, make sure we're reaching out to our teams in a more dispersed workplace, those people skills and checking in on our team members and taking that responsibility for their well-being matters even more.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely important. One of the conversations I have with my clients all the time is when you're doing the teleconferencing, always start with the how you're doing before you ask what you're doing. And we're just trying to be looking for those frames. And I work with a number of clients, and we teach them this metaphor called the gears. And fifth gear and fourth gear are like the productive driven gears. But we come back to first and second, where you're actually, and third, where you're actually connecting socially with people. And a lot of people are doing a good job of it. But you're absolutely right. We're actually built for human interaction. We're built not necessarily to do life, business and work exactly the way we are right now in this conversation. I get it. So again, the big ouch for me, because my passion and yours as well is leadership. The big passion is the role of leaders in how to fix this. But the first thing you do in the book is you uncover the fact that many leaders are not really across or aware or equipped of what it is that they need to be doing to be leading work well-being environments. In fact, you say in chapter 4, you say the biggest blocker to workplace flourishing is leadership. And as a leadership consultant, as someone who's been in and out of leadership roles for over 25 years, that's a big ouch. And you also said the statistics said 7 out of 10 of the challenges in work environments with regards to well-being were related to issues of leadership. So again, challenges, go as hard as you need to, because we've got to hear it. What are the problems that you uncovered in this area?
We found in this research that the best leaders have not just a vision for their organization, they've got first and foremost a vision for their team. They're enlarging leaders, and they're focused on getting the best from their team, on building their team as individuals as well as a functioning group, and that actually brings about the return for them. Now, in Australia, we've got a bit of a history, and maybe it's just a national psyche where we're skeptical of leaders, where we push back on the boss. And we found this in the research that the view people have of managers is not particularly positive. I mean, some basic research anyone can do, jump onto Google sometime, the search engine, and type in bosses are, and just look at the most commonly searched suggestions, and it'll say, without doubt, we've done it many times, it'll say bosses are, it'll say psychopaths, it'll say bullies, it'll say sociopaths. That's the perception that in Australia we have of bosses, that they're in it for themselves, that they're trying to just get other people to do their work and they're taking the credit for it. And, we've all seen the memes, don't just stand there. People will think you're a manager, because managers don't do the work. It's the workers that really do the work. Rather than the flipped version of that, where the leader actually serves, the leader enlarges, and the leader develops. And that is not widely understood nor practiced across the Australian landscape, as we found. But the fascinating thing with this research, we found those leaders who do that, and I know, that's how you are, Rowan, and that's how you train people. We just think naturally that's what leaders are about. It's that bottom up. Leaders are there to serve and support and equip and empower. And the leaders who do that, they had an ROI, they had a return on that approach because they had high, what we call net culture score. That is the scores that the staff members gave about how much they love the organization. A net engagement score, that is that the workers said that they were more likely to work harder in the organization. And a net retention score, which is they were more likely to say they'll be there in 2 years than those where we saw the poorer forms of leadership. So not only does it create flourishing, thriving, and benefit of employees, it creates a return on investment to the organization with better engagement, better productivity, and less turnover.
One of the podcast episodes we did earlier was with a girl called Sally McMahon, who's a work wellbeing specialist as well. And she talked about the idea of doing work wellbeing well is actually, from a commercial point of view, it's enlightened self-interest. And she was quoting a person saying that. But again, I think what shocked me a little bit, and I'm as guilty as being goal orientated and wanting to get that done as I am of wanting to actually raise up the next generation and everything in between. But what shocked me in some ways was the understanding of how big a problem this was related to leadership was more widespread than I expected based on your research. And it was more of a challenge than I expected based on your research. And we knew less of what to do about it based on the research as well. And you kind of just, that last little challenge at the end there where you talk about the facade of the wellbeing program. What did you uncover with that? Are we skating across the top of things again by not treating it as seriously as it should, or not letting it embed as deeply in our culture as it should? What did you see? What did you find?
Well, that's right. And there's always that instinct, that reaction perhaps for leaders to grab a program, to import something, to bring in some consultant who's going to fix that thing, and then we can tick it off the list and don't have to worry about it. But the whole point of this is that it has to come from the leader. It has to be the culture. It has to be who we are. We have to believe in it first. The tone from the top. And so what the leader believes and how the leader lives will flow down from there. So it can't be a bolt-on. It can't be a program, a facade. It's got to be lived out first. In fact, it doesn't even need to be a program at all. It's just about believing this stuff, communicating it, exemplifying it, and it flows down. We used in the book an image of a tree, and we all want to be the flourishing trees. We want our businesses to be the flourishing trees, lots of fruit there. And we call that the competence. That's what everyone sees. They go, wow, great business over there. Look at all the fruit. Look at the flourishing leaves. That's amazing. The size of the tree. But the size of the tree depends on the trunk, which is the second C, and that's the cause. The bigger the cause or the purpose, the bigger the tree or the competence that gets viewed. But of course, the cause has to be planted in something, and that's the root system, and that's the culture. And right. The better the culture, the healthier the culture, the more impressive the cause or the purpose, and the bigger the competence or the fruit. And what is key, I guess the final part of that little tree metaphor is, in what soil is the culture developing? That's the soil of leadership. And it all starts and finishes with leadership. So if we can create the right soil for the culture to grow, to produce and create that healthy trunk of the cause and the purpose, that we can have the competence of the flourishing. And so it does start with leadership.
It's so important, and you can see just in the conversation we're having, what the tagline of 4 Leaders is leaders worth following and culture worth reproducing. And one of our passions is, and we've started to shift the meme a little bit and talk to leaders about the fact that leadership's a challenge. Leadership is hard work. Transformation takes time. Transformation has it got to be a commitment from you, the person you report to, your peers, the people under you. This has actually got to be something that we're willing to take forward and do the hard work on. And so I appreciated that you didn't back away from the fact that although being really important and leaders not having a clear sense of how it needs to be worked out, it's still worth doing and it's still worth leaning into. When the beautiful part is that last sort of half or 40% of the book really does give us hope. And you begin to talk about some of the practical things that the people can do, that moving from the programmatic approach to the generational approach. I mean, that in itself is just a big shift, I think. And then you begin to pick up this whole idea of the work well-being wheel. Now, you don't have to rattle it off verse by verse on all of that, but I'm a leader, I'm listening to this, I recognize the importance of it. What are some of the things that I should be thinking about and contemplating and considering as I get started on moving towards this area and this place?
Well, we tried to make the book as practical as possible with these models and takeaways that could be put into practice, and that work well-being wheel is one of those. You know, we talk about in that the interpersonal side. We've got to remember that with our teams, the interpersonal realities of their life. That's the relational, which is the family, and the social, which is the friends. And then you've got the financial, and that's got two aspects. It's got the current earnings, but it's got the future security. You know, both of those, what I'm getting now, but tenure for the future and pathway for the future. You've got the vocational, which is the current workload and impacts, but also the purpose, and that's going to drive us long term. You've got the personal, which is the physical and the mental, and both aspects of that matter. And so what we end up with are practical or tangible elements in our well-being wheel. You know, the physical, the workload, the earnings, that's very practical. And then the metaphysical aspects of life, the security, the purpose, the mental well-being. You've got the personal, interpersonal, the financial, and the social. So it's this holistic tool that hopefully can help leaders think through it. Probably good leaders just are doing this anyway, but it can be nice to have a framework in front of you just to make sure if we were to rate each of those elements of the wheel, that we've got a round wheel, not just pumped up on one side, flat on the other, where we need to do a bit more work. That's the purpose of that.
Yeah, it's exactly what I was thinking about, how it could be worked out. You've got these things in front of us, and we can get some feedback from our people. We can be talking to the teams above, beside, and below, and starting to work out, well, where are our low points? What are our people telling us the big challenges are right now? That goes way past just the environment, but into that sort of sense of culture and sense of engagement that people have as well. It drops down even further, and you made a reference to this, Mark, with the culture cause and then the outcome as part of the fruit metaphor. But you talk about the idea of engagement being culture plus purpose plus impact, and helping leaders unpack each of these pieces of the puzzle and beginning to rebuild a work well-being environment. So again, I'm a leader. Give me some examples of things that you uncovered where leaders are doing this well. What are they doing? What have they understood? What mindsets have they adopted? What have they decided to discard and introduce? And how did they do it? What was the practical implications here?
Well, we put that formula together, well-being equals culture plus purpose plus impact, because that's what came through the research. And it's a little acronym there, CPI. And, you know, it's not the Consumer Price Index, but it's culture, purpose, impact. And culture, again, is the starting point. You know, that's the belonging, that's the social point, because a workplace, a company is a place of people gathering. That needs to be right. We even looked at the etymology of the word company in this, and it comes from the Latin words cum, which means together, and the pani part is the panis, which is bread. You know, we've got paninis to this day. So company is together breaking bread. It's together sharing bread. And that's literally what a company is. We come together and we share the fruits of what we produce together. And so culture has to be communicated there. And this idea that companies exist for shareholder returns, for pure profits, to grow the owner's assets if that's the sole purpose, it's a long way from what Campanus was really all about. And then you've got to have your purpose. And the bigger the purpose, the more engaged the people. And as we said, that next generation are wanting to join a cause, not just join a company. And then you've got your belonging, your culture, and you've got the mighty purpose. But then we've got to recognize the impacts. You can have a big purpose, but if people don't see they're making a contribution towards that purpose, if they don't see how their back office role is actually helping fulfill that big vision, they're going to get discouraged. So it's about celebrating the wins and giving the feedback and really giving that encouragement to those as they go along to show their impacts in genuine ways. And when you've got that culture plus the purpose plus the impacts, you've really got well-being and you've got engagement.
Yeah, I think, and again, it creates, for people listening to this, it creates a way of moving forward. It lets you evaluate which of the three areas might be the strongest and the weakest, and what it is that you can be doing to be building or rebuilding some of the pillars of work wellbeing into your environment. So I just encourage you to be contemplating that. You quote Tim Sims, where he says, we need to be highly motivated by balance. And again, my interest in this conversation is this unpacking the role of leaders in this, either negatively or perhaps aspirationally and positively. We need to be highly motivated by balance. Just contextualize for that. What was Tim talking about, and how does that apply in this environment?
Well, we tend to have singular focus as leaders. This is the quarterly goal, or we're chasing after this as our annual objective, And what Tim Sims, a great business guy, running Pacific Equity Partners, knows businesses. He says, no, you've sometimes got to have a duality or a balance in your focus. Jim Collins, Good to Great and Built to Last, the author there, he talks about putting aside the tyranny of the or and embracing the genius of the and, where you can go after both of those. And so what Tim was saying in the interview was, yes, we need to ensure our teams are getting the right balance in their life in terms of being refreshed, because we want people there for the long term, not to be burned out. But at the same time, we want to set clear objectives, and we want to hold them to a high account so that they can feel that they're making a contribution. Yes, we want to make sure that we've got social opportunities for our teams, but at the same time, we want to reward that individual effort and to give recognition for a job well done. So it's just focused on the fact that we can have multiple objectives going on, sometimes at other ends of the continuum, but that's the genius of the end, and that's what great leaders bring.
Yeah, one of my, if I don't quote him every time I have a leadership conversation, Mark, it's pretty close, and it's Jim Rohn. He mentored me from afar for years and years and years, and I still listen to his teaching now. He talks about this idea of having a sense of purpose, having a sense of understanding that you've got time allotted to labor, time allotted to the family, time allotted to self, and just this idea of going, when we keep things more in balance, when we keep them perhaps in tension, not in order, then perhaps we can have a more fruitful way of living in life and leadership. So I appreciate that very, very much. You talk about this idea of authority and autonomy, and then again, the refrain for me that it came out of the preparing for this conversation was the role of leaders. And so if you were to just stare straight down the camera and speak to leaders right now and say, hey, leader, this is the type of change that we need to be making. These are the shifts that the research uncovered. Here's what's possible and probable, and this is what you must be doing. I'd love you just to take some time just to speak straight into the minds and the hearts of leaders listening to this right now. What do they need to hear based on what you uncovered and learned?
Well, particularly as we look through the lens of the next generation of employees, and that's got to be our focus. Leaders are focused on the next, not just on the now. And we found that these next generation leaders coming to our organizations now didn't want that autocratic structure. They wanted the empowering leader. They didn't want the delegation alone. They wanted the leader who could lead from within and give the advice and mentoring. They wanted the leader who was collaborative, who was participative, who led from within and set that example. We've got a generation now who aren't afraid to push back on leaders or authority or systems or structures. And I think there's a healthiness to that. And so what they need is the leader who is authentic and the leader who can empower them. And the leader, as I said, who has a vision for them, not just a vision for the profits or the next quarterly goals. We found that the leaders today who performed best were not transactional, but transformational. So they didn't just transact in a simple way, but they had the ability to change things. That's what leaders do. They make things better. And so that's not just therefore a short-term focus, but a long-term focus. It's not just a focus on the value that they bring, but the values that they live, and a focus not just on the customer, but the number one customer, which is the staff member, the team. Because if we can look after them, they'll be empowered to look after the customer. So in other words, they had a broader perspective, and I would say they brought more of that humanity to their leadership equation. Not just the IQ, we need leaders that are smart, but the EQ and indeed the GQ, the generational quotient, the cultural quotient. They understood people. And so they were leaders of head and heart, and they transformed their organizations through that perspective that they brought.
Absolutely essential. So I'm a leader and I've lent into this and I'm beginning to do it and I'm engaging my team. What do I need to be looking for as a sign as to, well, I think we're making progress here, number one. And number two, if it was to go off track, if it was to get the sort of the wobbles a little bit 30, 60, 90 days from now, what do I need to be looking for in the implementation phase, Mark?
Yeah, great. Well, we're researchers, so this whole book was written from an empirical foundation. This is not warm and fluffy stuff. This is not just inspiration.
There are a lot of numbers in this book. There is no doubt about that.
And I think that's the point, Rowan, because you might have people listening thinking, we don't do the warm and fuzzy around here. We've got returns we need to bring, and particularly in COVID. I mean, come on. Our balance sheets are under pressure. Our profit is out the window compared to what we thought it would be. We've got to bring about better outcomes. We've got to work hard in these times. And so this is not about being soft in any way. In fact, these real leaders step up in times like this. But they do use the metrics and not just the financial ones. So they will do those staff engagement surveys. They will look at the culture of the engagement scores. They'll look at things like turnover. Even factors like sick leave is a great proxy for engagement. And we did this with an organization. We looked at their sick leave, and normally the older you are, the more prone to illness that one is. And it was interesting looking at it because they had the baby boomers with a lot of sick leave, and then Gen Xers with a bit less, and then Gen Y with a bit less. But when we got to the 20-somethings, it went back up again. And that's not because they're sicker, it's because their engagement is not as strong, and they'll pull the sickie or they'll have the doona day or something because they're not fully engaged in the role. So use the metrics, read the team, find out about what's happening and respond accordingly. Now, how do we respond? Well, if the engagement's not there, it means the vision's not clear. If the commitment is not there, if we're getting the ructions, maybe a bit of toxicity relationally in the team, it means that we've got a diverse team that aren't aligned on the purpose. I'm all for diversity. That's important. As I said, it's an asset. But within that diversity, we need a focus on the unity of the outcomes. So the leader needs to step up and make clear what the goals are, what the outcomes are, and be clear on the rewards for that or the consequences if we can't pull together. And so it is about reading the metrics. It is about responding with practicalities. And it does come down to them putting on the leadership hat, not just the management hat.
Yeah, and I think go on, sorry.
Well, just if the wheels are getting rickety, and it can happen quite quickly, that's why, again, quarterly check-ins on these metrics will really show that. And here's what we found every time. If we can get the culture right, if we can get the engagement right, if we can get the commitment to the task right, the numbers have a habit of looking after themselves.
Yeah, it's a byproduct of some of these more important things, and I think this is the beauty of this book. Again, listening to the conversation that I'm having with Mark, the beauty of this book is that it's a call to a much bigger issue than work well-being. It's actually a call to an alignment of culture, of values, of a particular kind of leadership that's actually investing in the good and the well-being of the people that you've been given. And I think this is a really timely conversation for us to have in the world that we're living in right now. So Mark, again, just big picture, what's your hope for the book? And should people want to, and I'm sure they will, like when I posted this on socials, I got lots of response that says, we know McCrindle research, we use them all the time. That's one of my go-to emails. What's your hope for the book? And knowing that people will want to know more, how can they contact McCrindle and get their hands on the book?
Yeah. Well, we're passionate to get it out, particularly all that's going on. And, the subtitle of the book, Work Wellbeing, Leading Thriving Teams in Rapidly Changing Times. And that's the times in which we're leading now, rapidly changing. And what we want are thriving teams. So the subtitle really sums up the whole book and what our passion for it is, what our vision for it is, that we can raise the bar of leadership, that we can lift the psyche of Australians to see actually leaders in Australia are doing a great job. Our experience of them is that they, really have helped us in our lives, that we can raise the vision of work, have that higher view of work, that it is a place of making a contribution. It is the means of bettering society. It is the means of blessing the communities in which we're planted. And hopefully, if that message gets out, then that creates community wellbeing, it creates workplace wellbeing, but it creates national wellbeing, maybe even some impacts internationally. So that's our hope. And the book's called Work Wellbeing, and that's where you can go for more information. workwellbeing.com.au is the URL, and hopefully people find some of those resources useful and find the book useful as well. We also have a virtual book launch coming up at the end of this month, Rowan. So again, go to workwellbeing.com.au and anyone can attend that free book launch where they can hear a little bit more of this, a bit of a summary of the book.
That'd be fantastic. Mark, thanks for your time. It's wonderful to have this conversation. When the book came across my desk, I thought this is not just timely, but it's an essential conversation. So I appreciate the work you've done. I appreciate the work Ashley has put into the book as well. And I look forward to it helping a lot of people in our country now, but also well into the future. Thanks for your time.
Thanks so much, Ron. Appreciate it.